So last September, we went from Texas to Alaska for a DIY caribou hunt after going in June of 2024 for a DIY sockeye salmon fishing trip. What were your thoughts as you were preparing and headed to Alaska for the second time?
Well, it's quite a bit of a different deal. First off, it was pretty kind of last minute. Like after, I mean, it's always something I wanted to do, and maybe I'd mentioned it once before that we could do that, but after the salmon trip, I was just like, shoot, if that's all there is to it,
Right.
you know, we should do a caribou hunt. And I don't remember when it was, but it was about a month before we left when I was like, hey man, the outfitters have all shut up shop and everything. The season runs way longer, of course, but because of weather and
Right.
logistics, they're pretty well down. But we could do no more effort than that was. We should do one. Let's do it this. Let's do it now.
Right.
And we could leave in like a month, and I think we could do this. Well, so then hadn't looked into it quite. You know, if I ever went caribou hunting, I always assumed it'd be self-guided. That's the only way I really wanted to do it. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? What are you proving?
Right.
So, studied. What was going through my mind is okay, this is a little bit different because now it's just all of Alaska. So you've got to find them,
Right.
and then get there. And initially, it sounds pretty simple, and then in execution, it wound up being pretty simple. But
Eventually.
yeah, but the weather was probably one of the biggest, things.
Right.
And having never been that far north in the globe ever,
Right.
and really, I figured, well, shoot, if we're going to do this, let's just go all the way and just do an Arctic caribou hunt. So weather was pretty much the biggest one.
Right.
And by the time we went, that wasn't running through my head as far as what I was, apprehensive or nervous about, because I started tracking it right then. And then I would say what was running through my mind was mostly weather, and all I really cared about was ice. That's the only thing that would have really,
Right.
I mean, that's it. So just ice. Can you fly in that country, that time of year? Because I could tell when we leave, we're 2 weeks past winter,
Right.
what they consider the beginning of winter in the north of the Arctic Circle, September 1st.
Right.
So weather, and then actually finding them, not in
Right.
theory, because if you do it, you want to actually find them.
Yeah.
And it seemed really simple, so I was just like, well, in case it's not, worried about. Then the third thing I would say was the anything to do with the legalities and laws, each unit's where you can hunt and where you can't as a non-resident.
Right.
And I'm not going to do a draw hunt or anything like that, so I only looked at over-the-counter areas. And then came up with a quick 3 or 4 different plans. And if turns out the weather was going to be prohibitive, we'd just move to the entire other side of the state. So, we could have wound up hunting down near the Aleutians, and
Right.
we could have been, all the way up there. I was just looking at weather, but I wanted to go up into the Arctic.
Right.
And it worked out perfect. To where we could.
It did. I mean, interesting. You're in Anchorage by the second day, and the third day we're up one side of the Brooks Range and down the other side, and essentially bupkis. Didn't see a caribou. Didn't, and for me, who hadn't done as much preparation, it just starts to build on you. Yes, You may be on a 10-day DIY caribou hunt, but we covered 700 miles and we weren't seeing anything.
Yeah, the biggest issue I had with that was, had I known essentially why we were wrong, why I was wrong on where I thought they would be, that would have been fine. But my biggest thing, if you recall when we're scouting, is, did we miss them?
Right.
Because, I mean, we're trying to intersect, you know, a whole caribou herd.
Right.
Because, you know, I wanted to see the big, you know,
migration
just streaming through,
right.
you know, because I'd heard if you're lucky, you might get to see that once in your lifetime if you hunt Alaska for 20 years, where you're right in the thick of it. And that's what, you know, since we had an airplane and we talked to a guy about, I talked to a guy about shipping our, you know, how can we with Alaska Air Cargo get all of our meat and rack back and everything. And he was extremely helpful, but he was just like, so, well, how are you doing this without an outfitter? And I said, well, I mean, you know, got our own plane, so we're just using our own plane. Well, you'll do really well then. You'll be able to you just get on the migration route. You'll probably get something big up there, especially that far north. You know, some of those herds aren't, you know, they just really can't be hunted. And except with either an outfitter and
who wouldn't have been doing that? Who wouldn't have done that for you?
I'm thinking, right.
Right.
Well, not that far.
No.
They just don't have to. It's poor business decision.
Exactly.
So I felt like, well, this is, from what I'm hearing, there was one other guy that was like, oh, shoot, you got your own airplane, man. You'll kill it. No, I did that for like 10 years. I used to have my own airplane. Yeah, it'd be great. You get one every time. Just find them. Well, so if you miss them, though, because I've never done it before, and I'm just going off things I've heard, you know, especially is that when they're done, like when they've come through, you know, it's over. So my gut thing was, though, which kind of proved out, if we had missed them, and there's no way that herd, you know, has got almost 200,000 animals in it, that we were, you know, at one point in the year, somewhere in the geographic area we flew, there's going to be 300,000 caribou that moved through there. So at least that's what happened last year, and for the last 20 years. But they do come through at different times, and what the trend is, middle of September, all the hunting's over with by then, unless you're probably a native Alaskan and have got some way to get out there and get after them, because the outfitters, for weather reasons, it's just bad business to be trying to do that in winter. And so, you know, and it's really not the snow so much, it's the ice. So I figured, though, and it really didn't hit me till we're flying back across the North Slope, and we're just sitting there looking and seeing bears, and I think that's all we saw. I don't think we even saw moose that day.
No, I don't think so.
And of course, that's not moose country up north of there. But when we're just flying back and across that super remote strip, there would be some stragglers. You know, there would be some stragglers, and it just looked so sterile. I mean, absolutely nothing.
They hadn't come down yet.
Man, they must have not come down. Well, now it's more of a like, how much further north do we have to go? And I'm just doing math, and I'd looked at all the, you know, Alaskan, you know, collar data and stuff to see kind of what their distribution looks like. And with few exceptions that I could see, and you can really only go back like maybe 16 years on that when they kind of really started, they're never bunched up that time of year tight enough to the ocean to where we should have seen something. So I was just totally confused, because we did a far enough hook up into the Arctic. I mean, at one point, you know, we would have been a couple hundred miles, you know, into the Arctic, you know, circle, and we were not that far from the ocean. I just couldn't see that there could be a couple 100,000 animals between those two herds between us and the ocean, and didn't have just a few. And if they'd all come through, since there wasn't any snow on the ground, I just didn't see how there couldn't be some stragglers or something.
Right.
So I was just really confused. Like, did we miss them? No, I don't think so. But if we didn't miss them, they just can't be all bunched up there on the ocean this late. But turns out they were.
They were. I mean, it all comes down to assumptions. And one person, even if it was inadvertently, told us, your assumption's wrong, boys.
Yeah.
We have not had a harsh winter.
Yeah.
And they haven't had a reason to come
Yeah.
down
Yeah, he
from
told
the
us
Arctic Ocean.
worst hunting year that he had seen.
Right.
The outfitters, he said it was brutal.
Right.
Because
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the numbers.
oh, I'm sure they're already out. I just
Right.
haven't looked.
But our fundamental assumption was wrong. But once he told you that, I mean, I could see your lights come on, even my lights came on, and I don't pretend to understand it that well. He
Yeah, if you-
mentioned a herd
yeah.
and where they would be coming from, and that they had come out of Canada.
Yeah, or they were right near it.
Right.
They winter, in Canada.
Right.
And so that they had come off the ocean and
Right.
had come down through the brooks and were moving. He said they'd already come through the brooks, he thought, is what he'd heard, and that they were over near, on the Canadian border. Well, that's within a couple hundred miles.
Absolutely.
So I figured that was close enough.
Right.
And headed that way, and it worked out.
Did it ever?
Yeah.
I mean, to intersect a caribou herd and see hundreds of caribou for a few days that's one of the highlights of my outdoor life. I know that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's really impressive. The number of moose
Right.
was shocking, but it wasn't like, oh, there's a moose
Right.
here, there's a moose here. What was weird is, massive shooter bulls
Right.
within feet of each other. And I don't know what that was about.
Yeah, I don't either.
I'm sure at some point there was a lot of sparring going on,
May have
but
been
you'd
over
see,
by then.
but this is the middle of September, and there would be twice I saw 5 bulls, exactly 5, 2 separate times, almost 3 days apart in a ravine, and each group was within 200 yards of each other at the outside, and sometimes they'd be, three of them just a few feet apart, just looking at the world, munching something.
Right.
Don't know what that was, but we circled them a few times and didn't see any cows. Saw lots of other cows. Then you'd see, 2 cows, and a bull, and 2 bulls and a cow, and
Right.
lots and lots and lots and lots of moose, but not like the caribou.
Right.
Thousands of caribou, and we wound up hunting a completely different valley from where we first spotted them. But the one valley that we first spotted them in, you just flew up that valley and it was just a river,
Yep.
of caribou.
Right.
Pretty cool. Definitely a relief that you weren't going crazy, because then you start thinking, so can I just not see?
Right.
Like,
What am I
what if
missing?
we flew over 100,000 animals?
Right.
And now they did. Of course, then as soon as I saw them, I'm just like,
Right.
oh yeah, I'm not blind. But you'd see moose, and you're like, well, but I can see moose this high,
Right.
see bears this high.
Right.
Saw a wolf, of course he was big and black, this high. Black bear, grizzlies.
Right.
So you're seeing everything else. But I will say those caribou, and that showed up on the camera. Like when I went back, there were hundreds of animals underneath that airplane. And it's because, I got to zoom in so much. And I had those 10-power binos.
Right.
But even without the binos, you could see the herds.
Right.
But when I went back over that camera, they are invisible. You just can't see them down there. And I will say that once you get on the ground,
Right.
and even when you're coming into land, they blend in
Right.
a lot.
Oh, they do. They
Mm.
do. Even when
And
they were walking
so they were
across
harder
the
to see.
mountains,
But
I mean, I kind of had to concentrate because they do blend in. But then when you see them, they're that beautiful mane.
Yeah.
And it's
they can't hide from that. That's kind of
Right.
like the
fluffy butt of an elk.
yeah, and those antlers on those moose.
Right.
But yeah, that fourth day, or when I got up, I'm like, okay,
Right.
this just doesn't make sense because it's 700 miles,
Right.
and we were zigzagging in that.
Right.
So I don't really know. I mean, I could have gone into the Garmin and got the exact track and done the mileage. I just did the rough. The average was 750 something miles, but in reality, it was probably closer to 800 and something miles if you count all the zigging and patrolling to be like, well, let's hop over, let's get across that river and go further north. Let's go further north. Let's go further north. And then and you do that. And then I remember I had a scary thought that, okay, what if we flew over 200,000 animals? And I'm just blind because,
Right. Couldn't see
that
it.
was worrying me pretty good.
But to get all the way back to Coldfoot and, but, God is good. And that one person, he corrected the assumption and told us.
They have not come down.
They have
and
not
I said,
come down.
well, I told him, I said, you're probably not going to believe this, but this is the route we flew. And he goes, since you left here yesterday, is a state trooper.
Right.
And air patrol. And he said, since you left here yesterday? I said, yeah. So we told him where we went.
Right.
And he knew it. And he was like, in that thing? Uh-huh. Where'd you get fuel? Well, we didn't.
Got enough range coming out of Coldfoot.
Yeah. Got to let our heater finish cycling through.
No problem.
It's got some type of harmonic thing that goes on with it. So he said, you did that with the without it needing to refuel. And I'm like, yeah, fortunately, we had the range and stuff. And then he's asking all this about the aircraft. And I'm like, well, once we get done talking about the plane, I said, well, you may not believe this, but that's the route we flew. I pulled up my phone and showed it to him. And you may not believe this, we did not see a single. And I'd like to think I got pretty good eyeballs and I know what I'm looking for. But now I'm starting to wonder, not a single caribou. And he goes, no.
Right.
No, they're all up on the ocean. I mean, stacked
Prudhoe.
on the beach.
Yep.
And, well, this was the Western Arctic.
Right.
Yeah, and he said the same was with Prudhoe.
Right.
They were doing the same thing.
Right.
And he said, never seen it, never heard of it. He said, I'm sure it's happened, but yeah,
Right.
we hadn't seen anything like it. They are all up on the ocean. Now, they haven't come through.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, well, in one way that was a relief because I'm like,
Right.
oh, thank goodness. Because, then it just dispelled, okay, well, now what?
Right.
And so I'm like, well, what do we do now? I don't know. One of the worst years on record. The porcupine has come through the brooks at some point, and they're somewhere over near
And
Canada.
because you'd done your homework, you knew what that meant.
And I was like, over near Canada? Okay. Well, so he finished checking us out, and we talked a bit more about the plane, and then we went over to the famous, what's that place called?
The restaurant in Coldfoot? I don't know.
I
Food's
think
good.
it's just the Coldfoot Camp, isn't it?
I think so. Food's good.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
It is.
I was shocked.
I think they have a pretty challenging crowd there. I mean, if
Well,
you're driving
it's
a
like
truck through
it's
there,
like a gold miner's camp.
it is.
So they have zero competition for 22 hours and however many 100 miles. I mean, the mileage
Right.
almost doesn't matter. It's a dirt road, so you have zero
Right.
competition in a day's drive in any direction. There's not a single restaurant,
Right.
and you serve food like that. I
And
mean, if
it's
it was crap, people
quality.
wouldn't have a choice. They'd still sell it.
And as you pointed out, they're probably blending a lot of moose into
Boy, I would.
into that meat. It was delicious.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was substantive.
I
meat.
hope that's what they were doing because
Yeah.
it was good.
Was.
That's what I'd do. I suspect maybe they were.
And you
had
almost
something
wonder
set
if
up
it
to where
was
they could use-
subsidized. It wasn't outrageously expensive, which they could have charged whatever they felt like charging.
Man, it was good.
If you wanted to
Yeah.
eat, you'd eat.
So we went over there
Yep.
and got there was a cell phone signal there, I think, that you had, strangely enough.
Yeah.
And so we got there and got the, looked it over a little bit on satellite, and then I took some note of some valleys and some kind of escape routes. Basically, that's what I was looking for.
Right.
Is I just needed, before we went into that, because I mean, you're talking, you know, it wasn't really any more remote than what we'd come from, but far more mountainous.
Right.
And, you know, I don't think you would have ever found enough food to walk out of where we came from, but you wouldn't have walked yourself out of the country that we were headed, and I knew that. So just looked at, if some weather, you know, came in and we had to leave and we couldn't get back to Coldfoot, where would we escape to, you know, and you know, anything over near Canada, and everything was a real far stretch, but then just took magnetic bearings and stuff like that of where stuff was at and where the rivers all ran to, and then where, if the caribou were coming through the porcupine herd. And I had looked up, so I knew where they summered.
Right.
And I just kind of looked, and he said they're in Canada, and that was the least studied herd that I'd really looked at. But if they go into Canada and they have to get on the southern side of the brooks, you know, to block some of that weather.
Right.
So they're going to be on the southern side. And I just looked and was like, well, it's wildlife, path of least resistance. And I just looked at elevations and altitude, and I'm like, I'm thinking that pass, and I bet you a large portion of the animals, of course, I mean, it was just a hunch, they're probably going over that pass. That pass breaks into ultimately 3 river drainages. We'll hit them, 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
And I'm betting they're in that big middle one. Sure enough, boom.
Right.
I mean, the minute we hooked, and I'm just like, boy, I mean, there was just these like 5 moose underneath us, and we were, you know, kind of circled to see, you know, how many there were. So I think we circled them once and headed up, and I'm just like, boy, that just looks like caribou country. So it was this little offshoot before we got to the big main one. Turns out most of the animals were in the big main one. I'm like, let's just go up there. And we flew up it for like 3 minutes. And I was just like, there they are.
Yep.
Caribou.
Yep.
Right there.
Yep.
And then there were just more and more. And when you started looking,
There
you were
were.
just like, oh my goodness.
Right.
They are everywhere.
They were.
So it was a big relief
No.
to,
No
you know,
question.
I mean, I would have been okay with not getting one, but just not knowing, like,
Right.
can I not see? Surely I didn't miss them. So it was good to just get to know that, nope, they hadn't come down. So we basically wound up hunting on the completely other side of the state from where I was intending to.
Right.
And
And again, if you've done your preparation and you have an aircraft that enables you to be able to do that, that's doable.
yeah,
And if not, no, you can't. I mean, it's a DIY.
well, yeah.
hunt.
So I guess it wound up being a pretty good, you know, proof of concept for something I always wanted to do. Because I've always thought, man, if you just, if I was going to build an airplane, I would do it this way so that you could.
Right.
One of the biggest things on my list was go to Alaska and just self-guide and go where you need to go, because there's no way that you, especially with a migratory animal like caribou, there's just no way that you're going to be able to control. So if you set it up, even if you're totally DIY and you're even looking at weather and you have the ability and you're going to fly up there, and I don't guess that would really work. I don't know how you do that. So if you're going to drive up there, and then what killed that for me was Canada.
No kidding.
Because I couldn't get what I wanted to legally across Canada.
No,
so,
you couldn't.
Okay, not going to be able to do that. I just pretty much wrote it off and be like, no, I think you'd have to have, you know, an airplane. Otherwise, you're going to schedule something, fly up there, and use someone's logistics, which is totally realistic. And you don't have a choice. So, you know, it's not bad, but because there's no alternative. But then, you know, if the weather sucks,
Right.
then that's it. So like on the east side of the Alaska range, in, I think it was Unit 19. There was a non-resident over the counter, and there are probably not a lot of animals there. Just looking at the harvest numbers, but I was prepared to hop over there and hunt. Weather was beyond horrible.
Right.
So I'm like, well, ain't going to that whole part of the state, so that leaves this open, this open, this open. And so just the ability to do that. But if you'd set it up and like, hey, I'm going to, and I didn't want really to do much with, I think they call it the 40 mile. I think that's probably the most hunted because more or less their geographic area is along like 3 basic highways.
Right.
So they're somewhat accessible by vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And, but not always.
Right.
Well, you know, I didn't care too much to necessarily try that, but I was prepared to, you know.
Right.
You know, but I figured there could be a lot of activity, and since we're not in that area, I was kind of nervous about, you know, I don't want to come in and mess somebody else's hunting up. I mean, I don't know what a whole lot of hunters looks like.
Right.
Now, when I looked at the numbers and you geographically, it's like you'd have never seen anybody,
Right.
but unless you were hunting along the highway,
Right.
which, you know, we wouldn't have been. But
Yep.
initially, I just kind of wrote off the 40-mile herd for that reason. Mm-hmm. And then the weather down there was terrible.
Right.
So we wound up having to fly. If you'll think about it, we flew over terrible weather. And you can see it in the footage going up there. Solid clouds underneath us. That was all rain. And when I hauled the meat back to Anchorage, it was all rain. And we flew through rain when we were bringing you back.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
so what was your thinking practically insisting on staying there rather than coming out first?
How many times do you get to be in the absolute remote wilderness by yourself and just soak it all in?
Yeah.
I mean, I you know, to me it was just so cool. You had a job to do. You had to take the meat and the antlers back so they could be shipped to the lower 48.
Yeah, but I could have got you out first.
Yeah, why would I do that? What am I going to sit around with my thumb up my backside when I could be in an incredible, pristine, complete wilderness? You know, what's going to happen to you? Pay your money, take your chances. In this case, we didn't pay our money because it was a DIY hunt. But, you know, I just enjoyed part of the day. It was raining and I was kind of bouncing around and, you know, I was like play acting. You know, if I had my bow, how close could I get? So I had my rangefinder and I'm acting.
How close
like
did
my
you
bow.
get?
Oh, for sure 70, likely 60, and probably 50.
I had a real good...
I'd have put one through it.
Yeah. I had a real good bow hunter tell me that if you're going to do a archery caribou, you need to be able to shoot 70 yards.
Yeah.
If you can't, that's fine, still go. But if you can shoot 70 yards, because that's just about as close as they will let you get.
Right.
And I think if you'd gone up along that lake in them trees,
that is where I went.
Oh, okay.
That is where
there you go.
I went up because they couldn't see you. There was such a group of trees. They were coming down this way, and they never saw me. So I was just like, you know, Indian over there, and then, you know, I was just catching as they were coming out, catching as they're coming out. And at about 70, you know, they'd probably smell it. They probably smelled me or something. So it just stopped. But I think I probably caught a few by surprise, decent bulls. There were at 50, 60, but certainly 70. And, you know, you don't have to be Fred Bear. 70 yards if your bow is dialed in, just a distance.
Yeah.
I mean, just, if you've practiced, then yeah, there's less room for error. But yeah, it definitely could have been done. And I have little doubt that if you'd have whistled an arrow with a good broadhead through one of those caribou, he'd have died.
Yeah.
So that's why, I mean, I wanted to do that. And I just wanted to, you know, be out there and see it and experience it.
One of the things that was a treat that unless you've had to do it otherwise, you really can't appreciate, and I've only had to do it once. I had the privilege with my buddy Tom of getting to go grizzly bear hunting one time in Alaska, and I never got one, but really incredible outfitter and all that. The only sucky part of that whole deal was the airlines. And it is just that you don't want to take crap. And I mean, at the time, I mean, well, I guess even now, I only got one gun that can do something like that. And it's this. And I mean, I could get something else, but it's hard to describe. I'm so busy and I'm just lazy, and and this is what I hunt with, and I'm good with it, and I just love it. And I spent so many years developing that for myself, you know, that, you know, I just wasn't willing to, just hadn't been willing to move on. So, I mean, that's all I had. Well, this is all you got, and it's your equipment. Is it going to get banged around? Is it even going to get there? And mine didn't. It wound up getting there ultimately in enough time, but 48 hours later, I was finally,
That is your worst nightmare.
there. And, you know, and that was back before all the mess with commercial airlines. So, boy, you're really flipping a coin now.
Right.
But just the treat to me was nobody messing with your luggage. You get to take whatever you want.
Absolutely. Right.
And, you know, my rifle was right up, you know, above us in the rack where I stuck it when we took off from Texas, and pull it down. I was a little bit nervous about conditions. So I've never shot. You know, a lot of things can affect a bullet, and a lot of things actually will affect a gun in the atmosphere.
Right.
Most of it's related to temperature, but I've often wondered, because I've experienced some stuff that was a mechanical change in the sight on not on open sights, but with scopes due to
Pressure.
air pressure. So I wasn't, you know, with iron sights, I don't have to worry about that, but I was worried about humidity with, you know, powder and shells, so I didn't load my shells. That's the best way I've found to mitigate that, is
Do it there.
Yep, do it there.
Take a press.
And then you know, because okay, yep, that's powdered, it's wadded, put my lube, put my bullet in, everything is great, and it's not, this didn't get wet, didn't get soaked, you know.
Right.
And so I was still, though, a little bit apprehensive of, all right, my gun is just dead on.
Right.
I mean, I can just drill, you know, a quarter down here in Texas. And then I get up to Alaska, what's it going to do?
Right.
So pretty much before...
And you sighted it in, and it was still hitting a quarter. It was hitting a dime, I think.
Well, yeah, it's probably about the size of a $50, really, but but it would have hit a quarter. Yeah, if it was a quarter, it'd have definitely hit that. It would have cut the edge out of a dime for sure. On the camera, it's so clear, you know, you can even watch the bullet run up there and strike it.
Right.
But, you know, you can't, I didn't think to replay it, and even if you could, I don't think you would have seen it on that little bitty screen in the low resolution preview. But that's the part of walking up there. Did you see it hit the tree? Of course, the camera's so clear. So, like, you knew I'd hit it when?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. It was like that. It seemed like there was...
Yeah, and the camera, you can actually hear it. And I'm usually really good at, it's a little tough, you know, if it's much less than 100.
I don't know what it was.
50 yards. You know, 100 yards is a little tough to hear
tree,
the
but
impact.
I could see
You
it
saw
was coming down.
Well, anyway, so it's kind of funny now to watch it back on video, because I remember what I was thinking. It's just like, okay, I'm going to walk down there and see if we got a big problem, because unless you've done that, you can't really appreciate, like, what if I'd gone down there and it's nothing?
Yeah. How do you sight it?
What's wrong?
Right. What is wrong?
Like, was it the shells?
You're right.
Was it
What's the variable?
Did my sights move? Which should be impossible, but something's off.
Right.
What?
Right.
Is this, everything is just fine and welcome to shooting north of the Arctic Circle with black powder?
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, even though scientifically that doesn't make sense, there is quite a bit if you take, that up to about 12 or 13,000 feet.
Right.
Yeah, you'll have now at this point, black powder, it decomposes, below the sound barrier. Ambient air pressure to that level will affect
Right.
the actual burn characteristics
Right.
of the decomposition of the black powder in the barrel, if you want to call it that. The explosion. And so I was just worried because I've never been.
Right.
That was the most unfamiliar environment I've ever shot black powder, and I'd have reached out there a ways, and so you're about to find out, okay, so when I saw that, I'm like,
Right. You knew it would work.
if we wake up tomorrow,
Right.
yeah, we got us a caribou. If we can get one of these suckers within at least a few hundred yards, we'll be.
And they were there. You're right. The freedom of being able to pack what you want. I mean, even something, like bear protection and flares and
Oh, yeah.
and pistols and things like that. Well, you ain't getting that through Canada.
Not without an act of parliament.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was a real treat. Just you show up, you have everything,
Right.
everything's working, and it's just, I don't know,
Right.
it's really cool. You really probably don't appreciate it unless you've done it otherwise. It's just like doing it out of your pickup.
Right. Yeah. Really.
It's like hunting in the lower 48. You just wake up early in the morning, drive to where you're going to go hunting, get all the stuff out of your truck.
Right. It's there.
And in Alaska, it's always, some type of interaction with a tourist environment like, boats or commercial airlines. And so you're just like trying to fight through and get through that so you can relax
Right.
and experience nature. And then, you got it hanging over your head, going back home. So
Right. Yeah, and we never had that. I mean, we just land the plane, put up the tent.
yeah, it was a real
Got your
treat.
stuff.
Definitely just whipping the gun out,
Right.
and I loaded up, I think 3 shells. And I can't remember if I loaded up 2 or 3 to just sight with. And yeah, I would have done 3. I wouldn't have done just 2 because, I'd have tried to figure out, adjust. And then,
Right.
if it's off, I'm going to shoot again to make sure it really is off.
Right.
And that it wasn't, some type of weird thing going on with, moisture or something. And so, yeah, for just first shot right out of the gate,
Right.
drilled it just where it would have sitting in Texas. I was just like, that was a huge relief
Right.
and a real treat.
I mean, so to go from on the 3rd day, we don't know what the deal is, to the 4th day finding them.
Yeah, what did you think when we saw them all?
Oh,
Like, yeah, but what were you actually thinking? Like, were you thinking about landing at all?
oh yeah.
Were you? Me too.
I mean, why not? I mean, because you just
What did you think when we landed? Like when the plane stopped?
so cool. I mean, the surface was wonderful. It was, I mean, we'd obviously been there in June, but that was a different deal. That was DIY fishing. So your tundra and your beaches and stuff like that. You're on this stuff, and I'd heard all the horror stories
Oh, yeah.
about walking in Alaska and how hard it is. Good gravy, this is like walking in my house.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Yeah.
is not hard.
Yeah. No, they're talking about that stuff. Basically where
That
we
rolling
were.
stuff.
Yeah, where we were basically probably going to wind up hunting
Right.
up there in the.
Right.
Yeah.
Where it's all squishy and, people are
the
walking
north
with
slope.
walking sticks. This is like, if you can't walk on this, I don't know where you could walk.
Yeah.
And it's just cool watching the caribou interact, and they're just kind of looking at us, and it was obvious they hadn't seen a whole lot of human beings. I mean, they were still in the wild, and they were leery, but there just aren't a lot of people that could have ever seen anything like that, except from a plane. I mean, you're not going to walk in there. You're
No.
way too far, and nobody's coming.
It's hard to even conceptualize her,
Right.
It'd be like being
And
on.
nobody's coming after
It'd be
you.
like being on the eastern side of Wyoming and then pointing to something over in Oregon.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that's the closest, you know, road or anything that you
Right.
could walk to.
Only in a plane could, could you see some of that? You're not going to walk it. And certainly in remote Alaska, nobody's coming after you. They're just not. I mean, so as an opportunity to see wilderness and wildlife, I can't
Yeah,
imagine anything
we
more
didn't have,
spectacular.
because it was, you know, just so thrown together.
Right.
And you could tell, like, when we decided, okay, because that's the last thing before, when that trooper was like, hey, you should go. Only chance you're going to have is probably over near Canada. Is I looked at all the weather over there, and it's like, well, this should work out just perfect.
Right.
And I don't know what the weather would have been like. I probably would have given myself a couple of day buffer, but I was looking for, you know, a minimum air temperature
Right.
on the daily high, because then you got your adiabatic rate, you know, above the ground. So
Right.
you got to be able to clear the mountains. You can't, you
Right.
know, get up into ice or
Right.
clouds to get over the mountains. So
Right.
I had this minimum air temperature, and it was like, well, looks like we're good to go, because I think every day out in front of us, we'll hit that. So
Right.
let's go. And it just, yeah.
I don't even know what
Praise
that
the Lord,
was.
it
Was
worked
it
out.
30s, 40s?
No, yeah, I wanted, I think 43 was my minimum. I wanted it to be about 45-degree high during the day,
Yeah. Yeah.
because then you could get out.
Right. Right. I don't think
I've
there
got,
were probably
and we
any
iced up,
lows.
you know, there was ice,
Right.
you know, almost 1/8 inch thick on the plane the morning we left. And even in the time that I was fishing, you know, which
Right.
we'll talk more about later,
Yeah.
it was snow had come down. Like when you wake up and you look at the footage, and I think, you know, I filmed the tent right before we went fishing, the plane all put together, and there's these mountains way off in the distance, and
Snow-capped.
there's no snow on
Oh,
them.
okay.
And then it's a crystal clear sky. And in the time we went fishing, it stayed clear, but some clouds came in,
Right.
and I guess must have swept over those mountains, because when we got back to camp, they were snow-capped.
Right. That's the part I remember.
Yeah,
I remember looking up there going, ooh,
it was striking.
that wasn't the way it was before. Well, it was beautiful.
Yeah, it really was.
The whole setting, yeah, we will talk about fishing at the pond down at the end and stuff. I
Well,
mean,
it's hard to put into words.
It really is. I mean, it's
That
one
kind
of
of,
mountains, trees, lakes, spectacular.
yeah. I mean, I more or less kind of expected, just because of experience. Like in your mind, you just imagine this is just going to be so remote and extremely beautiful.
Right.
But experience has told me what I expected was, yeah, we're going to get up there and it's going to absolutely suck.
Right.
And that's what I expected.
Yeah.
But nope, not at all.
It wasn't.
It was very remote and incredibly beautiful.
It was, and weather that was completely manageable.
Well, the weather is weird though. I mean,
Right.
it's funny to hear Alaskans talk about the weather. So I won't really get into that, but
Right.
you know, anytime you're on the rain shadow side of a mountain range, you actually have unpredictable bad weather. You
Right.
know? But the entire western coast, there's the reason they make movies in California. That is the most predictable, stable, temperate
Absolutely.
weather probably practically on the face of the earth.
Right.
And that is one thing about the majority of Alaska, despite the fact that people that live there will tell you, is it is nice that there's things don't just come out of nowhere.
Right. Yeah, because if they did, it would be completely
Well, it'd be really life-threatening.
uninhabitable.
It's bad enough.
Right,
The
it
weather is
is.
very life-threatening. But
Right.
if the weather was like it is here,
Right. Come on, like that.
you know, and it could change, you know, that fast, yeah, there'd be people really die all the time
Right.
due to weather. And so, have you ever seen no wind like that in your life?
Just remarkable.
Yeah, and I think it's, I think so. It's funny, because we're in the northern hemisphere, and when you look at how all storms and weather fronts build, that is where they come from.
Right.
So they haven't built any speed coming out of the north yet.
Right.
So in the mountains down here, you're never not going to have no wind.
Right.
Because you're making all these turbulence.
Right.
And you hear Alaskan pilots talk about it too. They've never flown through a convection turbulence.
Right.
And you can't fly any day down here. Even in the winter, you're going to have convection turbulence.
Right.
And so they just make wind, they make weather, they make storms. Up there, the Zippo.
Right.
And so it was just still.
And to think what that means for shooting, and I was
you could shoot a long way.
You could shoot a long way.
But the problem is, see, that scares me.
Right.
There's never no wind.
All right, not here. There isn't.
But I would have, and so when there's no wind,
Right.
I can't. I won't pull the trigger.
Right.
Because I'm just like,
It's got to be coming.
it's coming. And if you wait a few seconds,
It
or
will.
sometimes, then here it comes. And inevitably, if you shoot enough, you're just
Right.
like, okay, I guess there really isn't any wind.
Right.
Boom. Then you
Right.
feel it against your face. You're like, well, that's going to be a miss.
Right.
Second or two when the bullet gets
Right.
there. Sure enough, that was a miss.
Right.
Up there,
Yeah.
it really was no wind. I mean, all the way from to the ground, all the way up on that mountain, everywhere in between,
Yeah.
no wind.
Yeah, it was remarkable. I mean, I watched you sight in your gun here, and you're shooting in the panhandle of Texas, West Texas, and we all know it. I mean, you're just always trying to discern the wind, because that's one of the most challenging things of your ballistic calculation. I mean, of aiming, even a bow. I mean, you're shooting a bow 70 yards in West Texas. You better know where your wind is, because even with a little skinny arrow, it affects it. But yeah, I was thinking it, when I was there and, playing, hunter,
So-
that it's like, there's no wind.
Well, yeah, and it was so significant,
Right.
that
Oh, it's
we
striking.
put it in the video though, the silence that comes from truly,
No wind.
absolutely no wind.
Right.
So the sound of wind running through pine needles, wind in the pines.
Oh, yeah.
Even the softest of breezes in the
Right.
mountains. It's a
Colorado.
beautiful sound,
It is.
but you can just hear it,
It is.
just echoing up through the valley. I mean, we're talking 1-2 miles an hour.
Part of elk hunting.
And it's so common, our brain, I've been told that our brain will actually noise cancel wind noise. So on a phone or a camera, you're just like that.
Right.
Well, if you really concentrate, you actually hear it in your ear. If you stop and think about the wind, and sometimes when you're having a conversation, you got to turn your ear a certain way to break those turbulence so you can hear what the guy's saying, in this
Right.
country. And so your brain actually has like a noise canceling function where, yeah, as a baby, you hear it and it drives you nuts, but your
Right.
brain knows, okay, that's wind noise, and it filters it out, and you ignore it. You don't really hear it,
Right.
but you still actually do
Right.
hear it, and it's background noise. And you're so used to it, you're just used to hearing it. When that is gone, so totally 100% gone,
Right.
the silence is truly deafening.
Yeah, it
And
is.
my friend Kelly, having spent a whole lot of time in that country and in Antarctica, he said it's the same way in Antarctica.
Wow.
And that, because in the southern hemisphere, that's where their weather comes from.
Right.
And you will get truly, truly still. And there's no trees down there.
Yeah.
But up here, all those pine trees, would have totally given it away.
Right.
And he said, guys would go crazy from the silence, because even when they thought they were used to silence,
Right.
there's the ocean,
Right.
there's wind in the grass. But up there, you can have 2 or 3 days of absolute quiet, beyond belief quiet.
Yep.
You could hear a bird flying at 100 yards.
Yeah.
And you're looking for something in your immediate vicinity because you're not used to being able to hear a sound that far away.
Right.
It was weird. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was neat.
It was. I mean, the fish flopping around in that lake as you were catching them and stuff. I mean, man, it was like it was amplified.
Yeah.
Normally,
I guess so. Yeah.
you know, when
yeah.
we were up there in June, sometimes the wind was actually
Oh
blowing.
yeah, because we're right
and
on the coast.
You could barely hear the ocean was
Oh yeah.
always
Yeah, you
blowing
can hear
in.
that ocean. You can hear that ocean for a long ways.
You can.
I'm sure that would not appeal to a whole lot of people, but man,
Can't imagine it not appealing to people. I mean,
well, you never know what some people will do. I've been with some people. I've seen it more than I've ever had to deal with it. But even back when I was a kid in hunter safety, they talk about, I don't even know what they called it, but there's some people when they get that far out, like they think, oh yeah, I'd have no problem. I'd get way out there, and they're really not that far out. Okay, they're 10 miles from a vehicle, but then it dawns on them, and something just hits them, and they lose it. I mean, they just absolutely lose it. So, on a scale, being 10 miles from your vehicle, or being so remote that your little legs are the only way out of here, or that one vehicle is your only way out of here, and you're 30 miles from a paved road, we call that remote down here.
right.
But where we were at, not only could you not walk, you're within, there's a dirt road probably about 250 miles,
Right.
probably about 200 miles
Or
away.
were we an hour from the Arctic Ocean and maybe 45 minutes to Canada? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how cool. But,
I mean, in our plane we were.
yeah, in the
Yeah.
plane.
I think you'd have gotten there in about a month.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd have got there. Like you say, after the caribou herd goes through, what are you going to eat?
Well, I sure wouldn't be running to the Arctic Ocean for help.
No kidding.
We'd have been whipping a raft together, getting down in that river and headed south.
Right,
They get bigger as you go, but
right. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Just,
and they'd have probably made a movie about us in about 10 or 15 years.
yeah, post-humanist,
Post-mortem.
whatever they call that.
Post-mortem, I think.
Right.
Is that? No, that's not it.
Posthumously is what it,
Yeah,
that's after
yeah,
you're dead.
yeah.
Or something
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
what I mean.
But,
Yeah.
yeah,
They
just
made it this far.
so cool to be that remote and to get to see that when you know the only way you can see that
It's
is
kind of like the ultimate test,
yeah, yeah, no,
having your ducks in a row as
Yeah.
best you can.
right, right. But I mean, what do you need? You need some food, you need some covering. We had a great tent,
Yeah,
and
thank goodness.
yeah, no question.